Hey everyone, it's Cliff from Enochian Today, and tonight I'm going to talk about the Book of Silvered Leaves. Now, the first thing I wanted to say is that the Book of Silvered Leaves, it's not the same thing as the Book of Supplications or the Book of Liber Loga. And just to give credit where credit is due here, Aaron Leach talks about this in his The Enochian Saga, the exploring the angelic diaries or journals, excuse me, of Dr. John Dee. And he does a really good job, and you're going to want to look at pages 130 to 135 in this. And alternatively, you can look at and I'll just switch to my notes here. You can take a look at the Stephen Skinner diaries from his version of Dee's diaries and if you just skip ahead to May 28th, 1584, he has the full conversation there. So either one of those are a good source. Aaron Leach does a good job of summarizing this in this book, The Enochian Saga. So I do really recommend finding that. It's relatively inexpensive, and I'll link both of these books in the notes as usual. So, well, who sent this? Well, it was the angel Mapsama, okay, and his name was Dick Illis. It means say unto them or tell them, and that's kind of what he did. He told Dee and Kelly what to do next. So what is this made of? So obviously it's made of 48 leaves. It's a book of silvered leaves, so we'll get to that in a second, but they're supposed to bear silver. But at any rate, 48 of these. So this is a little bit of a parallel to the book Liber Loga, but it's not the same. Not the same. It's actually 48 leaves. Each one of them is 8 inches long by 7 inches wide. So 30 inches in a perimeter. And again, we get this number 30, just like the 30 aethers, 30 degrees of the zodiac, etc. So just keep in mind that if you're going to do that, these would be the dimensions. I went ahead and I think what I did is I don't believe I cut these out. I think I got nice untouched 8 by 8 inch paper, and then I just cut off an inch or something like that. So I will recommend, even though it's not stated explicitly in the diaries, to just go ahead and use unmarked or virgin paper, so nothing with any grid lines or anything, scrap paper, stuff like that. I would just say, okay, it's sheets of paper that you haven't used before. So the one thing that you will do right away is you will make sure that this paper bears silver. So bearing silver, bearing in the sense of just it holds it up. I come bearing gifts. I have them in my hands. I'm holding them up, and I'm about to give them to you. So not as in, gives birth to or anything like that. It's tough, words in English have multiple meanings. But in this case, holding it up. So literally, it just means, in my case, I just glued silver leaf to both sides. Bought a little bit. It's fairly inexpensive. And I just, did like a little 1-inch square on each side. So I bought 25 leaves, and I was just able to quarter them. And then, so for those the 48 leaves, you take 24 of them, you cut them in quarters, you get 96, and you have one for each side. And I just glued it on there, no big deal. And then literally the paper holds it up. So what's going on next? What do you do with all of these leaves? Well, before you actually do this next step, which is to bind it up, you're going to first want to make sure that you've got, wherever you have your room with a holy table. So again, this is assuming that you have your holy table. So again, if you don't have your holy table, don't do this. This is not something you can do until you have a holy table of practice. But once you have, so if you have that and it's all ready to go, you don't need to have everything, but you will need a holy table by definition, because you're supposed to put the actual bound book in the middle of it. Okay, that's the only reason why I'm saying you need to have it for this part. So now, do you need a full size? That's up to you. Obviously, if let's say you were to do something like print off the top of the holy table, or do some kind of miniature version, or whatever the case may be, something that you would do to cut down on costs, for example, no matter what, you're going to need to ensure that you're going to be able to put this book of silver leaves, right in the center of it. And that's part of the process, and I'll get to that in a second. But at any rate, so assuming you have a holy table, whether it's a complete one or a miniature one or whatever the case may be, or if you decide to skip this step and just put this book of silver leaves due to cost constraints, you decide to put that in the center. These are judgments you're going to have to make. I can't make them for you. You're going to need to ensure that you can actually put that book of silver leaves right in the center of that table, and close and be able to have that room closed and locked and secure for 2 straight weeks. Okay. So if you're, let's say, somebody who has small children or older children or teens whom you may not be able to trust, or bribe, or whatever the case may be, with a big allowance, then this would not be advisable unless you have a room that only you have access to, right? Or you can lock it from the outside, right? So at any rate, now another consideration is, well, what if you have a really small room? Could you do this in a closet? Well, how many closets are going to fit a holy table? So again, I don't recommend making a smaller version of the holy table, except as a temporary substitute. But if that's just kind of how you're stuck and your financial constraints are going to be how they're going to be, a 2 foot by 2 foot, you might be able to find a relatively large closet and consider that to be a room. A room is literally space, a secured space. So, it's up to you. Again, you're the magician. You're the one with the interaction with the angels. You might want to call on them and ask them. Okay. So why, again, are you going to do this? Put this in the center for 2 weeks? Because the angel said, okay, then you're going to bind it. I use the scrapbook as usual. Okay. And then finally, you're going to place the book at the center of the holy table of practice. And I do recommend adding 2 pens. Now, if you really know this, I'm impressed. But the next thing I want to put a caveat is that the angel Mopsama said, wherever that is, Mopsama said, man is not worthy to write that shall be written in the book. Okay? So why am I telling you all of this? Well, the reason why is that in my experience when I did this, I was thinking, okay, this is probably going to be a sanctification, illumination sort of thing. So the angels basically come out, and when I locked it away in this room that I'm in right now, actually, the angels, I could feel the energy building, and the angels were coming out, and they were making the energy broader and broader, and I could feel it expanding out from this room. And so the angels clearly had their own agenda going on, and I could feel that energy happening. So it was very, for you extroverts out there, it was very tangible. Okay. So why am I telling you to put pens in there if man is not worthy to write that shall be written? And of course, this is 16th century English. Nowadays, we would say people or humanity or something like that. Well, the reason why is that it's part of that sanctification process is, okay, now only after this are you able to then go ahead and write what should be written in the book. So I went ahead and did that, and it was really more like I was being given something, and it was through grace and through that process of sanctification that I could do that. Now, I wanted to take a brief mention here as far as just pause for a second, because I did get a comment from a friend who talks about this and says, well, you're kind of doing this a paint by numbers, and really, this is all not necessary. And she, the words were not those exactly. So I'm paraphrasing, so apologies for not getting it quite right. So this is a little bit of the nature of Enochian. And what I can say is that, like with Abramelin and with other rituals, there is something to be said for taking not just, the moment to hear, but taking an extended period of time. And yes, there's the things that you're supposed to do, the actual steps. And for whatever reason, the angels specified this to John Dee and Edward Kelly, specifically Mapsama, in the case of this book in particular. But there's also something about, okay, I'm going to separate myself from this book, right? And I'm going to leave it alone for 2 weeks. So in a lot of ways, a lot of the things, if you do these other traditions, for example, let's say a retreat where you go and for maybe a month, you're supposed to be quiet. You're not supposed to speak. Or even just the smaller meditation practice. Why, right? Well, really, it's not any different from what you might do if you're doing a prayer, right? With very little ritual. But with a prayer, one of the things that you're doing is you're not necessarily immediately speaking. You're trying to be quiet so that all of this ego mind and ego chatter can just fall away. And the only thing that's going to be left, ideally, right, is your heart or something, or very close to it, right? The heart itself is actually pretty still, I found, and empty. Not in the sense of like there's nothing there, but right, like it's empty of drama and empty of, all this other nonsense. It's just fine how it is. It's very simple. So I'm bringing this up to say that the process of getting to that point where you're very quiet, and from that, then the holy thing can come out, right? God teaches us to pray. Therefore, when we pray, we are engaged with this holy act that he has commanded of us. So in a lot of ways, this ritual in particular, but also, if you really look at the other parts of this system, they're asking you to do externally what you do internally with prayer. And there's sort of that phrase, as above, so below. Well, I would also, and also as below, so above. I would also say that there's also, you can extend that to as within, so without, right? And then also as without, so within. So in this case, you are making yourself quiet in the sense of you're making this room where you engage with these angels. You're making this room quiet. And then when you then return, it's a quiet space for you to have whatever experience, right? To be able to hear God's wisdom and stuff like that. Okay? So that's why I think the angels have separate yourself. And you get this a lot with you if you do Abramelin. The key to Abramelin is isolation, not complete isolation, not like a retreat, but you are separating yourself from this normal, ebb and flow and buzz and hubbub, and you're keeping yourself still, and you are asking God for wisdom, and you're asking God for help in the case of Abramelin, holy guardian angel. Angels definitely appear in the Bible, and it's something that, because you're still, eventually you are transformed internally enough for a permanent change. Just like with this, right? So this is pretty common. So just be aware. Let's say you wanted to engage in some kind of other angelic practice. This would be a thing you could do. Isolate or ask God for a ritual to help you isolate, but isolate and then, make sure that that's a constant practice, whether it's a room is separated from you for 2 weeks, or you isolate yourself 4, 5, 6 times a day, something like that, to do a prayer, even if it's a 5-minute prayer, 5, 6 times a day, that's half an hour out of your day. But you're making a point to separate yourself out. It's just sort of the nature of it. Okay. So having said all that, my experience was that afterwards, yeah, it's whether the words are coming through you and therefore it is not what you are writing, that's one interpretation, or whether or not you become sanctified enough that you are then worthy enough for the time that you are to write in the book. You are then I was told to go ahead and write. Perhaps the book would have been written on its own. I don't know. I didn't tempt the angels. The angels just said, yeah, this, there will be writing and it will be your hand doing it. So what was my experience? In my experience, the angels had me write out, and you can look at previous videos that I've done on this, but they had me write, it was basically 1 page a day for 49 days. So you get the same idea, or 48 days, excuse me. And I think on the 49th, the title might have come. I don't remember. You'll have to watch the old video. But then, and so what did I get? First 19 pages, much like in Liber Loga, or much like the calls, I should say, they were all Enochian letters, along with other stylization, other images and shapes. And then after that, there were each side of the page, each half leaf, if you will, there were 49 Enochian words, all Enochian, written to me, or about me, or just written generally. But it was much more personal compared to what we know is written in the Book of Liber Loga. Real name is Amzes Naghezes Hardeh. We know that there were certain letters and certain things, like, for example, 2 of the Enochian princes, Bephathes, in the different form of his name, Bephes, as well as Prince Bornogo of Mars and the Sun, respectively. Their names appear in the Book of Liber Loga. The name Lord is in there. Lots of stuff like that. But we don't know necessarily what was written in there. But the Book of Silvered Leaves was a little bit more grounded. And if you think about it, it makes sense, right? The sun and the moon being the Book of Silvered Leaves, silver very much going back corresponds with the moon. And you look up at the moon, it's kind of silvery for obvious reasons. But it was much more grounded and it felt more personal. And the moon is also closest to Earth compared to the other lights we tend to see in the sky. Versus the sun, which is not something we will ever walk on, and which is too bright to look at directly. So, maybe for a lot of reasons, it's more separate from us. I don't know. But at any rate, that's about it. So if you want to try it, that was my process. And you can feel free to repeat it. So, okay, that's all I got. Thank you so much again. If you have any questions, just reach out, Cliff, to me, Cliff, through my website, Enochian.today. All right, thanks so much. Bye.